our next talk is actually a double feature. Ryan and Marlena travel from San Francisco, and they're going to try what I hear is a crazy experiment, which is a CascadiaJS talk without cats. So we'll see if it's possible. Now they're going to be talking about mentorship, which is a really important topic. We need to continue the input of new ideas and new people into our community. So give a hand to Ryan and Marlena.
Hi, I'm Marlena.
I'm Ryan. So Marlena and I work together at Pivotal Labs, specifically on Pivotal Tracker. And Pivotal Labs, for those of you who don't know, it's a consulting shop that kind of focuses a lot on agile coaching and specifically pair programming. Being in that environment really sort of opened our eyes to the kinds of mentoring that we'd like to talk to you about today. It's the kind of mentoring that's about a conversation between two people.
So, it's Portland, it's a little warm. Who here at Cascadia is feeling the burn? Yeah. So Ryan and I attended this conference last year and we're sitting in the audience. And at the time, both of us were feeling a little bit burned out. Maybe some of you are. But there's something that motivated each one of us to be online at the right time, maybe 3 minutes before, to hit that purchase ticket button and get one of the tickets to this sold-out conference. Maybe it was that you want to recharge your passion for JavaScript, or maybe you want to reconnect with some friends that you know. I know some of us are looking for jobs. Personally, I came here to learn. I wanted to see what JavaScript can do, what kind of problems it can solve, and I wanted to learn a little more about the language itself. And I asked Ryan, so one thing Ryan would never tell you is that at Pivotal Labs, whenever anyone ran into any kind of crazy JavaScript or backbone problem, they would come to Ryan. So when I asked Ryan if he would come to this JavaScript conference with me, I was a little surprised. But I should not have been, because that's the kind of mentoring relationship that we've developed. So in this context, it's sort of more of an ad hoc, personal, face-to-face relationship that is based on asking lots of questions. I never went to him and said, "Will you be my mentor?" And there was no sort of external, mentoring thing where we got paired up. No, it was just, I was a tester on Pivotal Tracker, and in my spare time I was learning JavaScript. So when I ran into a blind corner, I would come into work and I would say, "Hey Ryan, can you answer some of my stupid questions?" So I think this actually points out one really important part of mentoring, which is that there's a large component of vulnerability and trust. So these are two things that are usually seen as a weakness in tech, which is really sad. But maybe some of you can think of a relationship like this you've had in the past. Maybe there was something that you were really struggling with that somebody just took the time to help you through, and it made all of the difference. And maybe you know people at work or outside of work right now who, are asking questions and trying to learn something. Maybe it's a tester. Maybe it's a product manager. Maybe it's somebody in marketing. But it's this back and forth of question and answers that actually ends up being a lot like pairing.
So to bring it all back, we think about pairing and mentoring as this total social interaction. Like, sometimes when we think about programming, we're like, oh yeah, it's something I do in the basement in like a really dark place all by myself with my headphones. But this is totally false. Like, the reality of like what we do is really like, we're working on teams and we're working with other humans and we're talking to each other. Like, it's not at all like this thing that you just do by yourself all the time. And you really shouldn't approach it like that, because I think it's really sad to kind of like be all alone. And rather, we're in this community and there's all these people, and there's so much more you can do when you kind of think about it and approach it from that perspective. but why kind of take the time to help anyone at all? I mean, you know, if you're so great, like, just do your own thing. But that's totally false also, because it's like, especially with technology the way it is, you know, we're often finding ourselves in different roles, you know. We're often like the person learning, and then we're often the person teaching. You know, we kind of transition through different teams, different products, and it changes like all the time. So you should really kind of get used to switching between roles and participating in both roles, because this is kind of just the nature of what we do. So I think it really helps people to be better, to learn better if they're better teachers, because they're actually like thinking about the things and putting themselves in somebody else's shoes. And this kind of brings it back to what we think, you know, makes a really good mentor, and that's empathy, because you really have to be able to think about yourself in that position. And that's a lot about, like, you know, what coding and what, you know, me as a person trying to get an idea over to someone else is all about.
And this goes way beyond challenging our knowledge and understanding, or even technical skill, because there's something really personal at stake here. And Ryan's mentioned empathy, and I've mentioned vulnerability and trust. And the reason why is because there's more low self-confidence in tech than I think any of us can imagine. As an example, I know someone who is a front-end developer doing really beautiful work. And this person made their way through a very competitive CS degree, but they don't feel truly at home in their job. Like, they feel like they got through a very strict interview process by some fluke. And that's imposter syndrome. But one thing to know about mentoring is that for this person, it's kind of a way to reach through the inadequacy, because when you're explaining something to somebody else, you're reinforcing what you know, and you're also building this pathway of trust and respect with somebody who's going to look up to you. And having somebody who you inspire and who really looks up to you like that is very empowering.
So maybe you've been asked to like mentor people at your job. Maybe you're a teacher or a parent, you know. There are all kinds of reasons to reach out. But one thing to kind of consider is that we kind of all do want people to kind of be able to help themselves in a way. So we need to kind of create the right kind of environments for people to kind of learn in. And I think what we are trying to strive for is, you know, these environments that are challenging but are not frustrating. So really what we want to try to do is like jump in right at the moment when someone's really struggling with something, not before that, and, you know, kind of be there so that they can work things out.
So before I talk about recognizing a good mentor, I want to back up and reiterate something that Ryan just mentioned, which is we really are wanting people to get to a place where they're helping themselves. And this kind of implies that I have specific questions that I want answered. Like, there's no hidden agenda in this relationship, and I'm kind of driving it with my questions. There's no superior attitude. Do not ever call anyone a Padawan. That's just really embarrassing. I mean, this is a person who lets me keep asking my questions without judgment, even if I have to ask them 2 or 3 times. And there's also a difference between someone who is just strictly answering your questions and someone who is truly a great mentor. So I think one great resource for this is Pixar's John Lasseter, who was the creator of Toy Story, because he has his own mentoring story, and if you Google him, you'll find these, and they're really wonderful. But he got his start by writing into the Disney animation studios because he was just so excited about animation and connecting with some of Disney's truly great animators. And this relationship carried through until all of these great animators left to start teaching at CalArts, an art school. And he ended up being the second person that they accepted into this program. So another side of this great mentoring thing is that if you shouldn't be afraid to go up to somebody truly great and ask them questions, even if you feel like your questions are stupid, right? Like at Pivotal Labs, and I think in general, Ryan is really great at JavaScript. And it took a lot for me to ask him these questions. But the flip side of it is that somebody really great got that way because they love what they do and they have a real passion for what they do. Like Ryan has a passion for JavaScript, and this is something that they pass along to whoever they're mentoring. And this is important for JavaScript because there are so many wrong ways you can turn. As an example, I did a lot of work in learning JavaScript and working through a particular book. I did like 10 chapters of this. And then when I went to start building things, and I was asking Ryan questions about this, he wanted to know like why some of the stuff I was doing was so old because JavaScript had moved on. And it turned out that the book I was using to learn was from 2008. Even if you are Googling and even if you're looking at Stack Overflow, there's just so much conflicting information, and it's so hard to find the thing that is right for your particular context at any given time.
So, like, you know, we all totally believe in like self-help, and it's great that we have the internet. You know, it's an awesome platform, and we can kind of just look things up. It's like still pretty hard to like. It's really hard to like sift through that information because it's not really edited for anything, and you don't really know like what you should be following. It's like what actually is the way I should be using, you know, how should I be using this library? Should I be using this library at all? There's just like a lot of different ways, especially different styles that have kind of emerged. So like how do we expect anyone who's just coming to learning JavaScript to like know these things or just intuit these things out of the thin air? It just doesn't make any sense. So we really sort of feel that like this is where like people with experience can really kind of like shorten that gap and really like fill in those blanks and tell you like, hey, you know, maybe we should like think about like looking at these kinds of things, or maybe at this point it might be important to look at frameworks. But you know, it kind of like it depends on what people are trying to learn, and I think that's how we can kind of shortcut this kind of learning. So, you know, we're all at this JavaScript conference, and you guys have already seen all the reasons why JavaScript is awesome from all these demos that have been put on by all the great speakers. So I don't really need to say anything else here, really. I think, you know, the thing I can most compare JavaScript to is like those 101 like electronic kits where you wire up transistors and capacitors together, and you just build something really cool. And it's this very hobbyist feel, which I feel really it's really very similar to like programming in JavaScript because you can kind of just take pieces of scripts and kind of glue them together and just run the code, and you can see that happening in your browser like anytime, on your phone, on a tablet. It's everywhere. So it's just ubiquitous. Anyone can do it. So, you know, we have all these great things, like great tools like in the browser, like the console. We can kind of just inspect like the websites that we use and see how they work and kind of adapt those small things. And that's a great way to start, and I think that's why like JavaScript is like an excellent beginner's programming language, because people are already familiar with these browsers, and they kind of get used to how HTML and CSS and JavaScript work just by looking at it. So this is all great, but at the same point, I think that there is a barrier to just hacking at JavaScript only, and that being the only way that you kind of learn it. I think that there's kind of a bigger leap that people have to make after they've been hacking for a long time with JavaScript. And I think that you just need to add some structure and to sort of solve that problem.
And this is when you're really taking off the training wheels. This is when you've worked through the tutorials that are like a to-do app or a blog app or anything like that. And these tutorials are only going to get you so far because they're not going to challenge your understanding in any big way. And while they are designed to give you confidence when you're learning, right? Like they have a known solution. This isn't going to help you when you're trying to build something real, because It doesn't get you accustomed to failure. This is really an awkward phase of learning because you're trying to work through being really uncomfortable with this, which is kind of awkward in itself, and then you know what's in these tutorials, but that is really hard to translate into a successful job interview or into making a commit on an open source project. And at that point, you really need some serious help. This is why side projects are just so great at this particular point in your learning. And also because if you're thinking about a problem that you want to solve, that's important to you, then you'll have a much stronger motivation to work through your discomfort with error messages or whatever. And it's really more motivating when what you're building means something. So Ryan has his side project called Redizen.
Yeah, so I also like to waste a lot of time on Reddit, usually, but not really like writing bots to like, troll people, but everyone's got a thing. So my focus on Redizen was kind of like parsing articles and kind of doing these in web workers, and it was really fun like experiment. Like it totally went differently than I expected, but what really worked for me in this side project was it was something that was sort of self-contained. It was big enough that I could actually like there was a lot of stuff that I needed to learn how to do, but it was like small enough that I could actually finish it, and that was actually pretty important, I think, because like it's so easy to let your side projects kind of like spiral out of control and get too big, and then you never finish them. And it's really nice to say like, yes, I like did this thing and it's done. So it's still a work in progress, of course, like any other side project, but I'm really proud of that.
And this inspired me to start building my own app. So as a tester, I was spending a lot of time with Ipsum apps like Bacon Ipsum or Hipster Ipsum. And I wanted to try building something really simple for the purpose of taking it through the entire release process. So I'm really into meditation and chilling out and trying to relax because tech is so freaking stressful. And especially, sometimes this filler text comes back at you when you don't expect it, and so it might as well be something that's going to chill you out a little.
So it's all great with having these side projects, but I think that it reiterates something that we all kind of need to think about, and that's like we all need to kind of think about how we build software in the real world. And it's pretty interesting because we kind of treat building software and writing JavaScript as a super creative process that that it's like you have these great ideas and you just kind of do them. But in reality, like it's easy to get kind of bogged down in details, and things don't often go as you expect. So how do you kind of work through those things? Well, it's kind of like important to think about the way that we actually build big software and like in the teams that we work in. And that kind of means that we have to like think about the processes that like actually work in building that software. And maybe those are some of those things that we can teach people as well that we often like don't even think about being important.
And this is where the lessons that you get out of mentoring go from some of the more expected ones to really reaching down.
I think we often focus on like teaching languages and frameworks like too much. And sort of the reality is that we really want to teach people about being good software engineers. Like a lot of these practices that we kind of like hold to, like the people that we look up to, those are like things that we should teach people about how to do. And I think that, we often talk about things like Agile, or we use Agile, and what does that even mean? But I think it's good for people to learn what that's actually about, like just to know, like, what is a stand-up meeting, like, and what is like how am I organizing my projects, and what does this all mean? Because no one really like goes out of the gate like knowing these things up front. So, but beyond this like process thing, which is important, I think there's other things that we often like overlook, like how to debug things, or code review, or just learning how to set up your project. And these are all like really important like things that we may not think that that's important to teach someone, but like it's so great to like just have someone run through how that actually works, especially when you're there. It's just it teaches you some of these things that we often take for granted, but are software best practices that we all know. So like, why aren't we teaching those kinds of things? There's already been some talks on TDD and testing, and it's kind of a controversial topic, but I think that you don't want to approach testing as like, you should test, and it's going to be good if you test, and you better do this thing, because I don't think that's the right message that we want people to hear, especially when they're learning, because that's kind of irritating, actually. Really, when we're thinking about testing, we should kind of think about it from the conversation that we're having. Really, like your tests they need to be things that explain how your program works. So it's very clear when I'm asking a question about like, how should this actually work? Like, is it supposed to be this? Is it supposed to be that? Like, what are the edge conditions here? What's it supposed to actually do? Those are like really important questions, and I think that people can have a lot of fun testing and understanding what tests to write and how tests are important when they look at those kinds of questions.
And there's also a very important thing here about testing, because it's a great way to reframe failure, right? Like, failure is a normal, everyday part of building successful software. And even if you've decomposed and tested, and so your failures are kind of small, they can still be unexpected, especially if you've gone away from doing tutorials. So it really helps to have someone guide you through. And that starts with small things, like you get an infinite loop because you didn't understand closures. But it goes all the way up through larger problems like, well, I think I chose the wrong framework for this app. So there's also something else to pull out of failure here, and it's a little more personal. So I'm up here on the stage talking at a JavaScript developer conference, and I've been working with Ryan, and I think a lot of you sitting in the audience are probably thinking, whoa, she's totally got this developer thing dialed. But the truth is, I'm still working as a tester. And so one of the lessons for me in this is that Ryan helped me reframe this as I'm still finding my fit in this community. I'm guessing I'm not the only one here who's doing that. And really the greatest lesson of mentoring is that you will need someone to tell you you belong. Because there are signs and people who, in their way, will tell you that you don't. But if you're asking the questions and you're writing the code, you already belong.
So I like to kind of bring it back to like the conversation that we're talking about, like in pairing and mentoring. And you really can't have a conversation without both people. So we really need to like make it so that the people who are like, who need to learn, who want to learn, reach out, and the people who know what to do, they are also there to be available to answer questions, to be there. It's like anyone. It's like your coworkers. It's other people in the community. It's professionals. It's total beginners. It's people you don't know. I mean, you never know like what's out there. And if we want to improve like the community that we're in, we kind of need to think about it from this participation approach. Like we all have to participate if we want it to be better.
And we are the ones who are building our own JavaScript community. So if we want a really great community, we should be radically open to learning. This means anyone can ask any question at any time. They can ask it again and again. And you're also part of this community if you're asking the questions. Because there's more to learning JavaScript, and there's more to our community than just the language itself.
We think that mentoring is the best way of defining our JavaScript community, and we hope you think so too.
Thank you.